We want to turn to our first story here. A recent big victory by farmers in the state, in one of the states of India, Maharashtra, were embarking on a long march. They were going to go 250 kilometers, but stopped before they ended because the state government there met their demands. So to talk more about this interesting victory, the situation for farmers and people living in rural areas in India, we are very, very happy to be joined by Vikas Rawal, who is a professor of economics at the Center for Economic Studies and Planning at JNU in New Delhi. Professor, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you very much. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Well, my first question is I was hoping you could talk a little bit about the conditions for farmers in India that would lead them to take, I think, what many people around the world would consider a very drastic step to march 250 kilometers.
And I would like to give you the context in two respects. One is that if some of the viewers have been following news from India, over the last few years, there have been several very, very large-scale mobilizations of farmers. There was a similar long march in 2018, which caught the headlines. And then in 2020-21, there was a year-long sit-in on the outskirts of Delhi by hundreds of thousands of farmers. For over a year, they sat on the borders of the capital city against three new laws that had been enacted by the national government, taking advantage of the COVID pandemic situation and the lockdown that had been imposed because of that. Now, why have farmers in India been protesting at this way in such large numbers? One need to understand the crisis that agriculture has been facing for some time now, but particularly over the last few years, because of the policies of structural adjustment in particular, which have resulted in agriculture becoming highly unremunerative. Indian farmers are very small farmers. They own land, sometimes, and most of them own land less than 1 hectare. But between and rarely beyond 2 or 3 hectares of land, farmers have been incurring losses. Farmers have been incurring making very little incomes out of agriculture, and that has been the bane of agrarian crisis in India. One of the major problems that Indian farmers face is that they work in an environment of uncertainty. And I think this is a problem that farmers in the third world at large face, that when you decide to grow a particular crop, you don't know how much price your crop is going to fetch. And with increasing integration with the world markets, these prices fluctuate hugely. So you can have a situation where you've worked on your land for 3, 4, 5 months, and then it's not even worth harvesting your crop because the prices that the crop's going to fetch is so little that it does not even cover the labor for harvesting the crop, leave aside all the expenses that you've incurred. This has been often the case with the onion crop, and that's the problem that led to the recent decision by farmers in Maharashtra, which is one of the major onion producers, to march to Mumbai and demand the government to provide a guarantee of minimum prices for onions. So that's really the context in which the recent march happened.
Were quite successful in getting at least some of their demands met. So can you talk a bit about, India's government is a very neoliberal government, very much, against making concessions to workers or peasants in this case. So what exactly did these farmers do in order to make their demands heard? And how did they reach this victory?
So you see, the farmers started marching towards Mumbai. The 15,000 farmers, a contingent of about 15,000 farmers were marching towards Delhi. And this obviously resulted in the developing cold feet, because this had happened in 2018, and they marched right through Mumbai that year, and they entered the city of Mumbai and laid siege to the city. In 2020, when it happened in New Delhi, hundreds of thousands of farmers on their tractors reached the capital city, breaking concrete barriers and boulders and whatnot, and braving water cannons, tear gas shells, and so on. They reached the border of New Delhi, and they laid siege to the city for over. I mean, they didn't lay siege to the city. They were stopped at the borders of the capital city. They stayed there for 1 year, over 1 year. They remained there. So this prospect that farmers can fight, they can fight hard, they can, they will stay, they will stay, they will, so all of these have been completely non-violent protests, large scale, and, required an incredible resolve by farmers to, brave winters and summers and rain and whatnot. So, the recent history of this, that farmers can actually do this. If their demands are not met, they will stay together and they'll fight long and hard. I think was what led to government developing cold feet. They just didn't want them to land up in Mumbai, and therefore they obviously came forward to have talks. There was a delegation of the leaders of this group which met with the government. So they started their march on the 12th. On the 16th of March, they had their meeting with the government, and the government accepted their demands. But the march stopped and waited. They did not suspend their agitation. They waited until the decisions that they had come to were placed before the Legislative Assembly of the state, and the announcement was formally made that the government would provide compensation to farmers until the government would. So all the decisions that had been reached with the farmers were formally announced, and once that happened on the 17th, the farmers gave a call to withdraw their agitation.
One of the things that I noticed is that there were a number of students who were assisting the farmers, civil society, people along the way, trying to, help them on this long march. And, that also seemed to be similar as, a couple years ago in this great revolt of farmers that you mentioned. I mean, it seems that the struggle of the farmers has also really touched a deeper nerve, maybe, of people in India about, injustice and inequality. I wonder what you think about that.
Well, I think you're right. There has been a growing discontent among workers, among students. I mean, students have faced assault in the public universities in India, across all public universities in India. So there's been this sort of the assault by this neoliberal government on public universities, on systems of public education at large, and on the workers. So there has been this, fundamental sort of condition which has resulted in all of them coming together and protesting independently, but also protesting together. For example, on April 5th, there is a big rally being organized in New Delhi by the workers, by the peasants, by the industrial workers, and by the agricultural workers together, a united action to protest against the assault on their livelihood. So you see, there has been this sort of growing unity and a felt need for united action by different sections of the working people in India, and that's what you see in the solidarity actions that you were referring to.
Because what happens next? I mean, is this the end? They got what they wanted this time around and it's done, or is there, in a way, this must be this must be validating, right? For these workers to have protested, have been victorious in this case, but obviously there's more to be fought for and more to be won. So where do they go from here?
Well, I think this does. Yeah, you're exactly right. It does validate. It does provide some validation for what they have been fighting for. It does, while their immediate demands were met, the more fundamental issues remain. And one major thing that farmers have been fighting for, in fact, in 21, when they suspended the agitation in New Delhi, it was on the promise that government will bring a law to provide a minimum guarantee of returns to farmers, a statutory guarantee of minimum prices, statutory guarantee of minimum remunerative prices. This was a promise that the government had made, that they would work towards it and they would explore ways of bringing this about, but they have not done anything about it. No movement has happened. No discussions have also taken place. So there are more fundamental issues, the larger issues of low returns to agriculture, which remain. And I think farmers are going to be fighting for those issues in the coming months, as you would see. And as I mentioned, 5th April is the next major landmark that we should be keeping our eyes on, because that's when farmers and workers come together on the streets of Delhi to protest against some of these things.
And I wonder if maybe in the medium term, we can or should expect this to have some political impact on the ruling party in terms of their prospects. I mean, internationally, for those of us in America, the BJP is presented as sort of invincible and inevitable, in every election now. And I wonder if this kind of agitation could potentially portend greater trouble in terms of the electoral prospects as well.
Well, yes, in the sense that it does make it clear that they are not invincible. This has happened time and again. This has happened every time workers and farmers have come together and have fought like this. This happened in 21. The Prime Minister himself came on the television and announced rolling back of the laws, which they had refused to discuss for a year. Similarly, this time the BJP government in Maharashtra had to the Shiv Sena BJP government in Maharashtra had to announce that they're rolling back, that they're accepting the demands of the farmers. So you are right that this does allay this kind of impression that this ultra neoliberal government is invincible because of the political conditions that they have created. But and the country goes to polls next year. So this is extremely important in that context.
Mm-hmm. Professor Vikas Rawal, thank you so much for joining us to help us sort through all of this here on the Freedom
Thanks very much for having me.